Buyer's agent to the buyer's agents? That's not a typo. What it is something that you likely never heard of. You probably already know that not all buyer's agents are created equally. But did you know there's actually some buyer's agents out there that use buyer's agents themselves? I'm going to unpack the rarely spoken about world of a profession known as a sourcing agent, aka buyer's agent to the buyer's agents. We're going to talk about how it works and everything you need to know. I'm Jeremy Iannuzzelli. Let's jump straight into it.
Everything school should have taught you in one place. With a property portfolio of over 17 million and an accountancy firm of over 16,000 clients, as well as being an accountant to some of the wealthiest people in Australia, Jeremy Iannuzzelli will be sharing his lessons on everything school should have taught you so you can build the life you want.
It is my pleasure today to bring in a couple of really good people I've known for a number of years, Greg Willmott and John O'Roy from DealSource. Now, very interesting business that they run and very interesting what they do with inside the industry of the property sourcing and buyer's agency space as property advocates. Now, it's a new concept. It's something that I was actually relatively new to. I never really seen it in the past until I met these two gentlemen and what they actually do. And essentially they're sourcing agents working directly on a retail basis, so they do work directly with clients, but then also work directly with other buyers agents and property advocates. They source properties for a wide range of businesses, whether the buyers agent sourcing it on an investment perspective or maybe even a PPOR, and then also sourcing it for their own clients as well. So they get to deal with significant volumes of properties. They generally have to be ahead of where other buyers agents are, and they've really got to make sure that they're analysing and researching the market, finding new markets, talking to new real estate agents, because they need to make sure that they're developing relationships well before that hot market starts to spring up, because they need to be active on the ground with all of their stakeholders, which are other businesses as well as clients as well. So I'm actually going to welcome to the show What School Should Have Taught You, Greg Willmott and Jonathan Roy from DealSource. Gentlemen, how are we today?
Very well, thank you. It's great to be here with you, Jeremy.
Thank you. And Jono, mate, how is you? I think you're down in Melbourne, probably chilling yourself away through their Four Seasons, but probably winter at the moment in that one.
Yes, that's it. I've got the Dyson heater on to my side there, trying to keep warm for you.
Very interesting, mate. You've got a hot market in Melbourne, but obviously a very cool climate. So I think it tends to just counteract. But gentlemen, you guys are a very interesting business, because there's no one I've met in your space that are doing what you do. So maybe do you want to share a little bit about, firstly, DealSource before we really get into the nuts and bolts of today? And I really want to get out some juicy content from you guys of, where you're buying and how you do what you do and the levels of volumes you work with. But before we do that, I'd love to get a bit of understanding of DealSource, who you are and what you guys actually do.
Obviously, as you alluded to, what we're doing, I suppose it really took off because it was solving a problem. I think one of the things that we've seen is, the time buyers agents are required to take to customer-facing, client-facing elements of their role, it takes them away from the repetitions with agents that's required to source good off-market and good investment grade stock. And so I suppose our solution to that is a company that really didn't have to invest the time into client-facing dialogue and managing client emotions and all those things. And we're just purely focused on agent rapport, establishing strong connections with stakeholders in a multitude of markets, and on the back of that, delivering good volume of investment-grade off-market properties. So that's the point of difference is, the time we're not spending holding hands and managing client expectations and all that. We are on the ground working with agents to establish those connections. So it's been a very, very, I suppose, busy first couple of years of trade. And we're just really enjoying the process and really feel like we're fulfilling a need in this space.
So very dialed in approach. You're not having to work around the harder facets of business, which is marketing and dealing with maybe thousands of different client meetings or expectations. And we all know that sometimes dealing with clients is the hardest thing. So, for me in my space, I love actually sitting down sometimes at a computer and just pumping out financial set of accounts and looking at journal entries and doing tax planning. And, sometimes it's fun and, rather than sitting down 10 times or 10 meetings a day. So it sounds like you guys are both dialed in on what really matters when it comes to, buying property, which is actually buying the property. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, absolutely. The feedback that we get regularly from, buyers agents agents and investors is that the property does the selling. If the property is good quality, it makes everyone's job easier. And so everybody has a vested interest in sourcing and having access to good quality stock, so I absolutely agree. Jono?
Yeah, I think as well what we've seen recently with the rate cuts is now probably clients is not the hard part. The hard part is the properties, because a lot of people coming off the sidelines that have been sitting there, and the demand for stock like under 700,000, because it's the most common brief in Australia. I don't think it's ever been as high as it is at the moment. So securing good stock is it's never been as important as it is at the moment, I think.
And I suppose that comes to a question I want to ask is, I think, Greg, you mentioned at the very start, you deal with not only on-market, but majority of off-market properties. How has that market changed as we've had a significant supply shortage of properties? Because it's all through the media. There's no supply of properties. We're not building anywhere near as many properties as the amount of people and migration coming into the country. So what level of off-market properties are you seeing, now, say, compared to 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Obviously, markets that have had active buyer agent interest in them for a period of time have clued onto the fact that they can absolutely achieve extremely strong prices for their vendors going off market. In fact, I've spoken to some agents, Jeremy, that have said that they believe they can get better prices off market because, the allure of an off market property is so attractive to clients that are paying a buyer's agent that oftentimes agents are getting better results. The one thing I would say is, and this is unique to what we, I suppose, focus on, is there is a very, very big difference between an exclusive off market property where it's one agent sending one property to us, which goes to one buyer's agent or investor, versus an off-market property that 4,000 people receive on a database mail out. And so I want to make that distinction because it truly is, there are good deals out there still in the hot markets if it's an exclusive off-market property. And that's what really takes a long time to cultivate a relationship where the agent will literally give you exclusive dibs for 24, 48, 72 hours versus, the mail out where everyone's fighting like dogs to get access to the property. So that's an important distinction and certainly something that we have seen play out more and more in recent months.
And I suppose on your end, because you guys do work on a very wholesale basis, an agent comes to you and you've got the opportunity not only to provide it to maybe the handful of clients you work with directly, but to many of the stakeholders, which are the buyer's agents. So is that the allure of why maybe agents would want to use, say, for a sourcing agent or someone like you guys? Because when they're giving you an off-market property, they're not having to go to or discuss it with 10 separate people. They're discussing it directly with you, and then you then discuss it to 10 separate people. Is that probably one of your strengths at the moment in your space?
Yeah. You go, John.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. They know that if they're sending it to us, then they've got potentially multiple shots at goal through multiple buyers agents. Obviously, we wouldn't send them all to multiple buyers agents at once, but they know, there's an extremely high chance that we're going to find a buyer because we've got such a deep pool of buyers through the panel of buyers agents that we would service. Yeah.
Now, we know that agents hold the keys to many of these things. They hold the keys to the property selling, they hold the keys to the vendor, they've created the relationship, and it's up to them to facilitate the deal. So the question I ask is, how pivotal is the relationship with the agent in the overall process of the deal? Can anyone become a sourcing agent, or is there just, shaking hands and kissing babies and multiple phone calls and building rapport with the agent to develop that level of relationship?
It's a combination of rapport and a track record. The one thing we all know is no agent cares how nice you are if you can't get the job done. So first and foremost, you need to be able to deliver a buyer and execute a transaction from start to finish relatively smoothly. So track record and getting the job done is the first and foremost. Your question around how important is the agent relationship, where we actually find the most value lies is like if you called an agent that you've never spoken to before and you ask for an off-market property and they go, yep, here's an address. Like if you're not moving in 24 hours, there's a very good chance that property's gone wandering to 5, 10, 15 other buyer's agents. The strength of a relationship that we've developed through our many transactions is an agent will say, here's a property, and I'll say, can you give me 2, 3, 4 days? And they'll be like, yep, no worries, let us know if it's not viable and I'll pass it on. So it's not just, it's the time they afford you. And that takes a long time to develop because it's not something that agents would give you up front in your very first transaction. That becomes really important to the buyer's agents and stakeholders because it gives them time to breathe. sell the property, go through due diligence, answer any questions before the property's gone. So I'd say that's the important distinction that next level of agent relationship provides.
Look, I watch lots of other podcasts and listen to lots of professionals in the space, and there's a lot of talk about hot markets and warm markets and cold markets. Is there a lot of discounting going on in hot markets, or is it just literally paying whatever you need to pay to secure the deal as prices or the demand starts to increase? How are you guys feeling around pricing and movements of pricing of properties in what would argue, or what some people would argue, being a very hot market where there's a significant amount of demand for little supply? Are you seeing vendor discounting? Are you able to get property discounts? What's the process around that?
I'd say it's a bit of both, and I'd say it's changed more over the time as more and more buyers agents have become involved. And I think some of them are now sort of setting expectations with their clients that, we're not going to be getting something 20, 30, 40K under market. We're going to be getting something that's in the right market that by the time we've settled will be under market, or, they will have had material capital growth within that time frame.
If I can just add to that, Jeremy, the other thing as well, I would say, is, look, if you're selling a property in a market that's been performing very, very well for a number of months, most sellers aren't idiots. They're not going to sell the property for nothing. What we do get access to, oftentimes, and again, on the back of relationships with agents that are high trust, is the agent may give us some context behind why it's being sold, or the urgency of the sale, or the nature of the distressed seller, which allows us, even in a hot market, to potentially get a better price than you'd otherwise get. And again, it really does take repetitions and high trust. But if an agent says to you, look, between you and me, this is the situation with the seller, they need a contract in 24 hours, they just want a fair price, can you find me something? We love those sorts of conversations, because that allows you to come in relatively sharp in an otherwise hot market on the back of the context behind the sale.
And you did mention something, and I think, Jono, you mentioned about a number of other buyers agents coming into the industry. I read a statistic the other day that 8% of transactions that occurred in the financial year, almost ending now 30 June 25, was transacted through the help of a property advocate, otherwise known as a buyer's agent. You guys are dealing with a huge amount of volume on a weekly, monthly and yearly basis. When you guys are transacting and buying properties in the areas that you think are, ripe for growth and buying it for, again, your clients and other buyers agents, how often do you actually come up against other buyers agents in that space? And it may not be your own people that you might be working for or working with, but completely external to you guys. Is it buyers agent versus buyers agent out there at the moment? Because sometimes I feel like it is, especially when I talk to many clients. Is that what's happening on the ground?
I mean, I know John has got plenty to say on this space, but from my perspective, Jeremy, truthfully, I hope this doesn't come across in a bad way. I don't really, the number of years we've been doing this for and the number of transactions, it would be a minority of deals that we touch where it's red hot, because we have exclusivity with most of our addresses, which is a fortunate position. The feedback I get from other people, buyers agents that are newer to the space, is that it is a dog pile, absolute dog pile. So again, it just reinforces the value in having extreme rapport and trust with agents, that you can get that exclusivity, because, everyone's got access to the same data points. Everyone's largely looking for the same type of property in the same type of market. So if the point of difference, if you don't have it with an agent, you are literally, it is a dog pile. Yeah. So, Jono, I know you've got plenty.
Yeah, I want to hear Jono. John, I want to hear your points, because Greg's kind of thrown you under the bus there. You've got some opinions there that you want to share. So, mate, this is the right space for people to listen to, because that's what this channel's all about. It's really to understand, things that we don't know, and if we don't ask, we will never understand. So, mate, I'd love to get your opinion on this.
Yeah, I mean, as Greg was saying, I think the majority of the time now, everyone kind of knows all of the areas to be buying in. And so competition is just getting tougher and tougher. And I think as an industry kind of trend, we're probably heading, I know in America, it's pretty much every transaction now has a buyer's agent on the side of the buyer. I don't know if we'll ever get there in Australia, but we're certainly heading closer towards that. And I think for investors, it's almost getting to the point of, it's a necessity to have a buyer's agent just to get access to stock. And you're seeing some of the agents even cotton onto this in some of these markets now, and are essentially setting up their buyer's agent arm. And just when you call the agent, you'll be getting the message, you need to speak to this buyer's agent, which is maybe someone that they know, to sort of capitalize on that. So I do think that it's going to be a case of, in the future, you may need a buyer's agent just to get access in certain markets. Yeah.
So it's interesting. So you said there's real estate agents you call where they actually then redirect you to maybe chat with a buyer's agency arm they have. Is that correct?
Wow. Yeah, we've seen that happen. Yeah.
Wow, it's very interesting. So it just goes to show just how much the landscape is changing as far as properties are concerned. And look, typically I don't get to see that a lot because I'm buying in areas where there might be a lot more owner-occupied dominated properties in that space. I'm not really dealing with other investors, more so dealing with, other owner-occupiers, which tend not to be the best thing because they overpay generally based on emotion rather than numbers. But by, say, other property professionals at a price that you may have said no to, is that happening in the space?
Yeah, I think, a trend I've seen is, especially as buyers just get bigger and bigger with this scale, generally the expectations of clients have to be managed. And so they drop those. And so the standards drop as well, because when you've got a team of 30, 40, 50 people, you've got costs to cover and you've got stock to deliver. So yeah, we're seeing, some buyers buy on market, whereas they previously said they'd never buy on market. We're seeing them pay over market. It's all going on.
Yes, it's interesting. It's just a change in space, and it's hard because I remember seeing the property advocacy space over 15 years ago, and it wasn't big. Buyer's agent would only be working with 2 or 3 people at a time. There'd obviously be lots of properties to choose from, and you'd get some heavy negotiations. But as the industry, and 8% transactions occurred over the last 12 months through buyer's agent, it's becoming adopted now by many people. It's just assumed that you want to invest, you've got to use a property advocate. Yes, to save your time and B, also to potentially save you money. But it's just interesting to see that as your team gets larger, there are more costs. Sometimes maybe making the deal as opposed to really choosing something that's great investment, that's where the trade-off might be in the future. So it's interesting to see that you guys are seeing that. Now, I want to really go in another step into more so areas and selections. You mentioned, Greg, that you guys are all using the same data sets, as other buyers agents or potentially other property advocates. But is there anything unique to you guys that you have access to? Are you doing anything a little bit different to really understand an area, where it's about to move or how it's moving? Is there anything that you guys adopt or can share with people that they might be able to look at on their own and try to source properties for themselves if that's what they're aiming to do? Is there anything you can share to give some value to listeners?
Yeah, for sure. I think the unique perspective that we have had is, all the clients that we work with and the buyer's agents were in effect in competition. We kind of had the unique vantage point of working with a multitude, and the most common question, which we're always very, very careful and being respectful and not divulging too much, is where are the other buyer's agents buying? Because that was the most common question, hands down, we were asked last year. Obviously, we had the responsibility not to divulge that, but it just goes to show that even though buyers agents may have had their own views as to where the right place to buy was, they were always very curious what the other views were. I would say, to answer your question, obviously in the last 2 years, we have already seen a shift in locations. I would definitely say there's been a pullback on the Western Seaboard transaction volumes from when we started in a major way. When we sort of started, it was a lot of Northeast Queensland, a lot of Western Seaboard. Western Seaboard has certainly, obviously dried up a little bit.
So when you say Western Seaboard, you're saying specifically the state of Western Australia, correct?
Yeah. So obviously, being in that investment price point of that sort of 500 to 650, we were doing a lot of Mandurah, South Perth. A lot of Bunbury, Geraldton, Armidale, these sorts of locations, because obviously even 2023, 24, Perth, was typically, certainly premium Perth was beyond the typical investment budget. And we've seen massive probably drop off in interest in those sort of Bunbury, Geraldton, Armidale, South Perth locations. So that's been probably the most notable withdrawal from a market that we have seen in the last sort of 6 to 12 months. Not to say there's not value out there. If people want that, that's fine. That's what we have seen personally. And also Northeast Queensland, still strong, still lots of interest, but certainly a lot of interest in more recent months in, Metro Melbourne, regional Victorian markets, which there's a perception of undervalue relative to the rest of the country. So they're the very, very high level trends that we've seen. That's not to go into specific suburb data, but at a very high level, that's what we've definitely seen.
And how have you found, and I know, Jono, this is probably more so for you because you're a Victorian local, the market there, and I've noticed it over the last 12 to 18 months, moved from a private treaty market to more of an auction market. Now, typically, I like going to auctions because not many property advocates will attend auctions. How are you guys, focusing on buying, say, properties down in Victoria when a majority of properties potentially are now going to auction? Again, is it relationships? Are you actually going to the auctions? What things are you doing to combat that level of transaction or way of transacting property?
Yeah, so I'd say that probably in regional Vic, the auction culture is not quite as prevalent, and so there's still plenty of opportunity well, not expectation, I should say, on the vendor side to sell without going to auction. But yeah, we're not completely opposed to going to auction. We have done occasionally, as long as we've set the right price expectation and limit with our purchaser. It is still possible to get a good quality asset at an auction. And as you say, there isn't typically much competition from other buyers advocates at those. And we've successfully transacted in that way in the past. Greg, I don't know if you want to add to that. I know you've done a bit more of the auction, don't you?
Yeah, the other one would be even though Metro Melbourne certainly does lend itself more to an auction transaction culture there, there are still properties in those metro suburbs that are tenanted, and may be less conducive to an owner-occupied purchase. And so having as many conversations with BDMs that might have access to addresses where there are tenants there, agents are more likely to be open to a non-auction transaction method for those. So that's been one way that we've been able to peel off a few what you would consider auction type properties without having to go to auction. And then to Jono's point as well, in our experience outside of Metro Melbourne, the regional Victorian markets, it's very, very similar to the Western Australia and Queensland regional market transactions, which is agents are very open to off-market if the property suits that and the vendors are open to it.
What things are you guys looking for? And I'll say it on two ends of the spectrum. What things, and this is always the question I get asked, what things do I need to look for when a market is slowing before it happens? And what things do I need to look for when a market's heating up, again, before it actually happens? So I'll direct that question to you. What things are you looking at a market when you start to see signs of things slowing down? Because again, you guys are on the coalface of it all. You're at the very early start of it, or you're in the thick of all the transactions happening, again, with all the volume that you guys are doing. What things are you looking for signs of things slowing down and signs of things speeding up before majority of the population see it?
Agents calling us saying, if I was willing to take this property off realestate.com, could you find me a buyer? That's a conversation we would never, ever, ever have in a market that's red hot. A sign of a market slowing is agents actually coming to us saying, hey, I know you like off market. Do you like this property? And if so, I'd be happy to take it offline for you. So that's a key giveaway when an agent's having those sorts of conversations. Obviously, more sort of relating to our stakeholders, less desirability from a buyer's agent perspective. Obviously, that's a key signal that we're going to start seeing things slow down when they're already looking to other areas. Your common metrics like rental yields dropping, days on market increasing, the stuff that you can see with your various reporting measures. Jono, any others to add, mate? Just throw under the bus.
Yeah. I think the yield compression, lack of affordability, which can be measured, obviously, is something that a lot of the buyers agents look at. Differences of opinion sometimes there as well. And then it also depends on the area. Some areas I would look at, when a buyer's agent starts talking about an area on their social media, that's probably the time that they're getting out if they've been in that area for a while. Some of them, some of the smaller areas, they're able to sort of inflate them themselves because of the amount of volume that they're transacting in a single location, which is typically what a lot of them will do, is they'll get behind one location, one or two, and then they'll, that's their area because it's just efficient to work efficiently like that.
So very much
be another tell.
Very much almost like a self-promotion of the area. and then it's making it, well, everyone can say they've done really well after it's gone up 10 or 15%. No one's really sharing too much of things before they go into it because they want to make sure they get the good pickings. I suppose I want to go back to one other thing that you guys mentioned, and it's more so around a couple things. Budgets. You guys talked about, people looking for prices at this point, or, people's budgets are at X. How have you seen the budget for investors change over, say, the last 12 to 18 months? Has it become smaller? Is it ultimately becoming larger because prices are increasing? What's the feel of that? Because obviously you're getting a spec from various many property advocates and stakeholders you work with. Are budgets smaller, tighter, or have to organically open up?
Yeah, we've definitely seen the amount of money it takes to buy a good quality asset on a decent portion of land increase. So there is an element where someone has a hard limit of 500K, and that's all they can afford, and the quality of the asset you can buy in 2025 for that money is a lot less than obviously 12 months ago. So I would say for people that have decent capacity, budgets have increased because they've had to spend that amount of money to buy a solid asset that's not going to cause maintenance issues, and they've just have had to be okay with maybe a property that needs that might be a bit tired, or a smaller portion of land if they do have that restricted budget.
And what are people not wanting, and what are people mostly looking for? Again, you guys get briefs from everyone all over the country. What are you guys actually steering? Again, might be in a very hot area, but what are you guys actually steering away from? And what's dragging you to something? Because there's thousands of different properties and property types and all that stuff on a market at any one point of time. Now, not everything's created equal, but what's dragging you to something where you're saying, yep, that's the one we're buying? Again, all in the same market, like for like. And what are you tending to stay away from in that same market?
Yeah, I think it's definitely being dragged towards the most common brief, which is like sub 700K, 4.5% yield or thereabouts, reasonable amount of land. So typically 500 squares or above. Nothing typically too much maintenance, under 35 years old. So whatever areas where they have the most suburbs that would meet that criteria would be the areas that would be the most prevalent in still. And I think, just to say, add to that, it's becoming a little bit more, or more and more challenging as more and more entrants. And because that brief is so common, because it's the lowest bar, for most investors can make that brief, it's just becoming harder and harder to actually get value in that bracket.
So 3-bedroom, 1 bathroom, say 1 or 2 car spaces, 500 square metre block of land, property younger than 35 years of age, so not a huge amount of repairs and maintenance may be potentially required. Is that the typical brief that you're saying, Jono? Is that what you're kind of alluding to?
Yeah, that would be the most common brief across Australia at the moment, based on my direct experience.
And what are you guys staying away from? Is it the absolute opposite to that, or what is a unit? Absolutely staying away from units that's not in the brief at all that you're getting. What's kind of the things that we should be looking not to go towards?
So obviously natural disaster profile, like a lot of Melbourne and Sydney based investors in northeast Queensland, very, very sensitive to, flood mapping, obviously, is an obvious thing. And the biggest killer that we have seen is, small land component. Obviously apartments is the ultimate example, but even freestanding properties that have a very, very small block of land, quite challenging, very little interest in that sort of asset class. The other thing I was just going to add to Jono's point there, Jeremy, is it is very much in the eye of the beholder. Like, there are some buyers agents that really believe in the strategy of buying tired, small cosmetic uplift, and then rent the property out, and so their clients are looking for that because obviously they've got access to the marketing materials and the content that buyer's agent puts out there, versus there are a lot of just set and forgets, so, definitely staying away from natural disaster profiles, small blocks of land. But then I suppose for us, it's more around allocation. If we see a property that's tied but has potential, then it's not a good property. It's just knowing which buyer's agent and their clients would have more interest in that.
Beautiful. So it's important. So again, guys listening to this, because they're dealing with obviously lots of volume, they get to see where things are at. But if you've got a product and a property that, larger block of land and it's a 3-bedroom and it's less than 35 years of age, then you've probably got a desirable asset, which will then have some potential value uplift because you've got more people, more eyes wanting to buy that particular property. If you've got a property that's over 35 years of age and you're wanting to put on the market, well, you've just heard that the buyer brief's not there for those type of things, or it's very limited. You're only limited to a very small amount of people that want to buy an older property, that want to spend the money on renovation. So if you're in a market market where you're looking to sell and your property, might be in a heated market and everything around me is going up by 20, 30, 40%, but why is my property not selling? Well, you've just heard it. People don't want an older property. They don't want a small block of land. So what things can you do to make your property attractive to not just, people looking to buy private treaty or auction, mums and dads, but also other buyers agents or sourcing agents as well. So it's important when you are investing in property, you want to buy something that everybody else wants. Ideally, you want to buy it cheaper than what everyone else is willing to pay. And if everyone else wants the asset that you have, well, then that's going to give you the opportunity to have the value uplift in the asset. But if you're buying a property, and what I'm hearing, Jono and Greg, and please interrupt me if I'm not saying it correctly, if you're buying something that nobody else wants, it doesn't matter how good the price is, you're probably not going to get any growth. Am I correct in saying that?
100%.
And it could be in a hot market. Again, you could have bought in the northern parts of Queensland in an extremely hot market. But if your street just was, not more than 6 to 9 months ago with under 3 foot or 4 foot of water, well, then that's a property that not many people are going to want to buy because, again, it's in a little bit of a flood or disaster prone area. So it's important to know as an investor or anyone wanting to buy property, just because it's cheap doesn't necessarily mean it's value. Just because it's cheap or it's been on market for 70 days doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to fly off the shelf, as soon as you buy the property, or it's going to get substantial equity uplift. You still need to make sure that you're buying an asset that other people are willing to pay more than what you paid for it in the years to come. Because if you don't have that level of scarcity, then you're really just relying on inflation to help that property move. And sometimes it may not even move with inflation in the long term. Greg and John, I just want to ask one more question before I leave you here today. And this is just value for our listeners. Now, not necessarily wanting you to break down a specific LGA or even specific streets, but seeing that you guys work with, thousands of people from a wholesale and retail, from a buyer's agent to mums and dads and stakeholders galore, where do you see yourselves buying, a large portion of property over, say, the next 12 months? Because a lot of our listeners do it and want to do it themselves and are gaining more knowledge. Now, again, don't want you to talk and give all the secrets away, but where do you guys see the next 12 months? We mentioned the WA market. We mentioned the far north Queensland market. Where's our next 12 months starting to look like?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'll be going into Metro Melbourne for my next purchases because I just feel at a higher price point than 700,000 because I feel like that's where you're going to get much better value. There's much less people chasing that stock from investors generally. So that would be my pick. I mean, anything within a reasonable radius of Melbourne where the data looks good. There's plenty of options according to the data at the moment. So that would be my pick, yeah.
So just above that cheaper price point that a lot of investors are wanting to look at, that 500 to 700 mark, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, anything I would say up till probably 900 for me, just in terms of holding costs, because it might get a bit prohibitive once I start going beyond that. So maybe 700 to 900, I think.
And Greg, sorry, I rudely interrupted you, mate. You were going to share your little bit of a pick.
Yeah, I was just going to largely, I suppose, echo those thoughts. And again, speaking from the perspective of someone that holds real estate in Northeast Queensland already. So for me, definitely keen on Metro Melbourne, regional Victoria pockets, obviously relative to some of the other locations nationwide that have had massive growth cycles post-COVID. That's definitely the value for me. But the small caveat to that one there, Jeremy, also is speaking to people that have looking to buy their first investment property and they want to, then rebound into another one very, very quickly. For them, it's immediate and fast equity, So again, it's still based on strategy. And for them, it might be the tail end of a fast moving Northeast Queensland pocket to get the first one, to get some quick equity into the potentially a regional Victorian purchase as well. So it is based on what you potentially currently own, but future focus, absolutely Metro Melbourne, regional Victoria for me.
Love it, gentlemen. So guys, you've obviously heard some comments of people that deal with thousands of transactions on a yearly basis, dealing not just with mums and dads in the retail side of being a buyer's agent, but also the wholesale side, which is sourcing properties for other professionals. You've got to make sure that if you are wanting to do it yourself, you've got to build really good rapport and relationships with agents. Don't assume that you're getting the only off-market deal. You may have been the third or fourth in line, so don't necessarily think that what you're getting is absolute value. In the end, a real estate agent's sole goal and result is to provide, more money for their vendor, and that's what they're getting paid to do. So I never can blame a real estate agent for trying to create that fear of missing out and that scarcity factor in a property deal. Also understanding, you mentioned about strategy, Greg, also understanding where you're looking to buy, whether it's really quick results that you're after for some equity uplift and then move into other markets. Also, you've started to hear that the budget's starting to increase for a lot more investors. So that's very important. If you're looking at your $300,000 and $400,000 properties of yesteryear, it's not necessarily going to be found today. So you still need to factor that in, and that's going to be important as part of your journey as well. Greg and John, I really want to thank you very much today, guys, for just sharing a little bit more about what you guys do, because it is fairly new in the industry. Again, personally, I haven't met, businesses like yourselves, which, not just help people buy properties on a retail basis, but also help source for, other professionals in the industry. So it's really good insight that you guys have been able to provide about the processes, how you guys are sourcing those particular properties, what people are looking for, because again, you get to deal with so many transactions on a yearly basis. You guys are really in tune with what's happening in a market at any particular time. So it's really good that you got to share what people are looking for and what people aren't, and also giving you a little bit of a prediction over the next, say, 12 to 18 months. I think that's very valuable because, again, as you guys go through, the next 12 months of the new financial year, there's going to be more briefs and more clients and hopefully more interest rate cuts. And I don't envy you guys. You guys are going to have your hands cut out, your hands full and your job cut out for you over the next 12 months as more interest rate cuts potentially come in, and that drives even more fuel for demand. And we've got lacking supply, gents. So I don't think it's going to get any easier. And it's exciting to see that the number of transactions with buyers agents is starting to increase. There's definitely a role for property advocates and property professionals in many people's journey. But again, if you're wanting to do it yourself, you get the opportunity to learn and hear from people in the industry, not just buying one or two, but buying thousands on a yearly basis. So very lucky to have you guys here to really share what the stories are out there and a little bit more about what you guys do. So Greg and Jono, thank you very much for your time. And I really appreciate you guys being on the show here at What School Should Have Taught You.
Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate your time, mate.
Thanks for having us.
Lovely. Guys, don't forget to hit like or share if you're listening on iTunes and Spotify. Subscribe if you're listening on YouTube. I'm Jeremy Iannuzzelli, and that is What School Should Have Taught You.